Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, the program where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me today in the studio are Israel advocate and Assistant Director of Standing Together, Ari Fold, founder and Executive Director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman, former Meretz Party Knesset member Avshalom Vilan, and Yotam Yakoba, the head of public activity from Peace Now. Thank you all very much for being here. All right, now our top story today, the international community is still reeling from both the latest Syrian chemical weapons attack as well as the joint US, UK, and French Air Force's response to it. The allied Western powers launched over 100 missiles striking multiple targets allegedly associated to Syria's chemical weapons program in and around the capital city of Damascus. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who with the backing of Russia, Turkey, and Iran has denied ever using chemical weapons, is now denouncing the attack that he calls war crimes.
Does not represent a change in U.S. policy, nor an attempt to depose the Syrian regime. These strikes were a justified, legitimate, and proportionate response to the Syrian regime's continued use of chemical weapons on its own people. We do not seek conflict in Syria, but we cannot allow such grievous violations of international law. Our goal in Syria remains defeating ISIS by, with, and through the 70-nation coalition. But we will not stand by passively while Assad, backed by Russia and Iran, ignores international law.
Этот факт американской агрессии свидетельствует о незаинтересованности США в объективности проводимого расследования, стремлении сорвать процесс мирного урегулирования в Сирии и дестабилизировать обстановку в ближневосточном регионе.
All right, so I'm going to start over here. The big question is World War III on the horizon?
Look, there are powers here which are good and evil. And there is a split, and unfortunately the world has so adopted diplomacy over morality for the last 75 years, including in the Holocaust times, when, for example, Britain made a deal with Hitler for diplomacy reasons. And this is what we're seeing today. There's good and bad here. Assad has murdered 700,000 people, and we see the person on TV saying that Trump is bothering the peace process in Syria. I mean, personally, I don't think Trump should have stopped. I think that the world, again, staying silent as people being murdered is a horrific thing. And World War III, well, that depends if the sides of evil want to step back and stop justifying murder, a genocide of a people. It's absolutely horrendous.
So then would you agree, Dr. Sherman, that we need to go much further in Syria? Or much more needs to be done, rather?
One thing's for sure, that this isolated strike will not make much difference. I mean, already today everyone's discounting it, and I understand that Trump's military experts are urging him to take up a sustained effort, because this is something that I think, even though it may set back the chemical production enterprise in Syria back a couple of years, certainly won't stop Assad, especially when you take into consideration that the number of Syrian civilians killed by the regime with chemical weapons is far less than the number of civilians killed with conventional weapons. So I don't think this is going to be a game changer in any way, except perhaps on the surface of diplomacy. But you know, I think that we're on the cusp, we could be on the cusp of a situation degenerating into a great strategic threat for Israel. I mean, and the unexpected here is to be expected. The potential for unintended consequences is huge, and the situation could easily spiral out of control. And Israel could find itself facing a coalition of Iran, Syria, Russia, at least as an inhibiting factor on our freedom of movement, and Turkey, who you never know is the wild card, even though it's supposedly a NATO member, could find it in conflict even with the United States on certain issues in eastern Syria.
So I'll bring the conversation over here now. You know, why do you think that chemical weapons, as Dr. Sherman has said, is garnering such a bigger response when in reality it's actually not the primary cause of death and destruction in the war?
I would like to say that for sure we know that atomic, biologic, and chemical weapons are banned by the international law, and we should condemn it any opportunity. And I will agree with Ari that we should look for the morality and do whatever we can do that none of those weapons will be in use. But as Sharon said, that we need to stop the war, or we need to find a way that for Assad to stop killing his own people, because it doesn't matter which weapon is it. When people get hurt, when the war is just escalating, we're in a jam, and this war could slip into Israel borders, and this is the thing I'm worried about.
So do you think that preemptive strikes like the ones we've just seen, is that the way to go? Is that an effective deterrent, or do you think that, as we've heard actually from Russia and Iran, I'm sorry, not just Iran, but also from Syria, that this is just emboldening these enemies?
Look, I think that the American or the Western strike was some kind of a show, meaning that I'm also a player on this game, and according to our opinion, such a kind of using like the chemical weapon is not done. But having said that, the problem is from Israeli point of view and from Middle Eastern point of view, that the American and the French and the British are not real player in this very moment because, okay, they threw the missiles, but that's it. Putin continue to run the situation. The Iranian doing to the best of their ability in trying to get into it. And in the end of the game, Israel will be stand alone against the Iranians. If, for instance, our borders on the Golan Heights, in this very moment, al-Nusra and all other revolutionaries are staying over there. But in the moment that Assad forces will go over there and they will take back this land, it's quite possible that we'll find over there Iranian troops.
So do you think the Israeli military should be more active? Yeah.
I just want to comment on that. I don't think that Israel will stand alone. I think the United States is backing Israel in any situation.
Do you think the United States will commit troops?
Well, I think the United States is going to back Israel unless there's going to be something very unexpected, that Netanyahu or his administration is going to do something that is a no-go for Trump administration. Although I'm not seeing this situation is going.
Netanyahu.
So what? No,
just follow Netanyahu.
No, because I'm saying that the United States is going to stand and back Israel if it's going to be a clash between Iran or Syrian troops in Golan Heights, as Abu said.
So can I just look again? I want to go back to what I said originally, and this is the big problem here. We're playing diplomatic or political games. People are being slaughtered, and again, like I said, the world has gone such a whirlpool of diplomacy. So what I'm saying is the following: at the end of the day, there's good and evil here. Not because they're Arabs and we're Jews or they're Christians. It has nothing to do with that. Assad is slaughtering his own people. Iran gives no freedom to their own people. The Muslim regimes around the world are giving no freedom and are killing people. And what's happening right now, whether they're doing it for diplomatic reasons or for morality reasons, America said enough. Now, will it slide into our area? I do think so. I think it's been in our area already for 70 years, by the way. And the problem, let me just finish my thought. The problem is that sects of our community, instead of saying, look, this is a culture that's dangerous, that believes in genocide, that doesn't believe in freedom, we've given into those. And we've shut a blind eye to Syria for the last how many years? So the doctor was right. The conventional weapons are killing many more people. We didn't care. Well, we didn't care. The world didn't care. Chemical weapons, oh no. There's a culture here. And as long as that destructive culture that believes in genocide exists...
So how involved should Israel be? How involved should the world be? I mean, is this just for show, as former Customer Member said?
I think that Israel needs to be involved, not in the open with the Israeli flags and the tanks, obviously not. I'm sure we're involved already on the information we're giving to the United States as well. But again, what's the goal? Right now, the goal was to bomb a couple of chemical warehouses, and that's it. That should not be the goal. The same way we as Jews did not want people, just to bomb here and there, but we wanted the United States, for example, to bomb the train tracks to Auschwitz, which did not happen. So I disagree with you, by the way. I think it's diplomacy and politics. I expect real war against evil, and that's not happening yet.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, Assad regime and ISIS are the enemy for sure, right?
No, not enemy. They're evil.
They're evil. Okay, but they are the goals, right? And let's say the coalition will throw Assad from his place and from his position. Then what? And this is maybe the Iraqian case. People think what is going to be with the
question. I would urge my friends on the other side of the table to consider is just imagine what would happen if we had relinquished the Golan, and then project that to another part of the world and say what would happen if we had relinquished Judea and Samaria? Would you have Iranian troops there as well? So I think the major lesson to learn here is how dangerous it is to make benign assumptions as the basis of your policy. If you want to
I want to come back to this actually, because I do have some questions on that, and you've raised some very good points. I want to come back to this, but first, what are the incentives? Or I'm sorry, not incentives, but what does Russia and Iran hope to get out of this, and why are they
different things?
Even more importantly, Russia and China.
And this is the key question, by the way.
The different things, I think, because you
how are they influencing
you have an array of potentially, or not only potentially, some of them are actual enemies of Israel with divergent interests. Iran wants to take over the whole of Syria and turn it into a forward base to attack Israel, whereas the Russians are merely interested in preserving their interests in the Mediterranean and the immediate region, while the Turks are interested in preventing the Kurds from setting up a base of political independence. And so these different players all have different interests. The only real common denominator is the animosity towards Israel, with perhaps Russia not being an active opponent of Israel, but definitely could be a constraining influence on Israel's freedom of action, especially if it brings in the advanced anti-aircraft missiles.
Final point,
I just want to say one thing. Doctor mentioned Israel. Again, 700,000 people are being murdered in Syria. So as much as they have animosity towards Israel, right now it's a little bit about someone else. But I never mentioned Assad. I said evil. You put a man in there, and you meant you made believe like the solution is a man. It's not a man.
Just be specific.
Let me explain to you. I'm saying there's a culture. It doesn't matter what the person's name at the head of that culture, as long as there's a culture that doesn't let women drive, as long as the culture that throw homosexuals off roofs, as long as the culture of people who slaughter people. Iran, even the Arabs in Israel are saying, how could the West do this? How could they? It's a culture problem, not an individual problem. And as long as we don't understand that, it'll keep happening.
The question is not just cultural. I think
we have to look. Last point, and then we have to move on.
And we have to look on the current political situation. The Iranian real interest is to have a direct line from Tehran to the Mediterranean. And this is the main goal. Israel, it's other goal, but it's not the main one. The Russians want to be against a player in the Middle East. Russia is not anymore a superpower because it's economic weak. But having said that, they are till this very moment running the area, and this is one of the problems. There is imbalance between the power of the United States, even after the strike, and the real power of Russia, which in this very moment are the real player.
Because they're more committed.
So
they're more committed.
So we'll come back to that. But moving on, officials both in Israel and the UK, US, France, etc., are praising these latest airstrikes. But on the streets, many are protesting, if not at least questioning these attacks.
Power play, between these different powers in a whole regional conflict that the U.S. has greatly exacerbated over the last, 15 years through waging illegal wars, launching the war in Iraq first in almost 16 years ago now, something like that, and based on open lies. Okay, this is not about preventing war crimes. This is about regional rivalries between these different world powers, and has nothing to do with the interests of the people of the world. What the U.S. is doing there is not to stop something bad from happening, because what the U.S. has been doing there for over a decade and down to today is actually further fueling.
So again, in line with Yotam here, and actually questions that I pulled right from social media, with the Pentagon even admitting that these strikes really didn't even put a dent in the chemical weapons stores, what is the goal here in Syria, and where do we go from there? I'll actually start on this side.
Okay, I just want to say that we see this one strike like a one-time thing with no American or the coalition ultimatum. Nobody knows what's going to be in the next time that Assad is going to is going to use a chemical weapon. And I think this is part of the problem in the strike. Although it was forceful and I support it, and I think it was a good act, it's not quite enough.
Look, the main problem is that in the Middle East, like other places, you can never know what does it mean. Let's assume that Assad will be out of power. Who are the next forces will take care of this?
Well, so that's my question. Let's assume that the goal, for example,
Assad is overthrown, and
if we overthrow Assad, I mean, who replaces him?
And look what's happened.
So what do we do then?
Take Gaza Strip for an example.
Perfect example.
You see, there is no leadership over there. You have the Hamas, but there is no hope, no future, nothing. Now, in the very paradoxical way, it's become a real Israeli problem. It's not just own problem, it's our problem. Israeli policy in the last 6-8 years was, leave it aside, we have nothing to lose, and we'll keep it, and we'll see.
So not doing anything has not brought any,
I think that this is exactly the problem. That we are finding ourselves in a situation that whatever we do, going toward a dead end. Meaning that we have to look for other creative solution that the other side has an alternative that they can start living without it.
Really, that's the situation in Gaza. They gave the Gazans everything they want, but I don't want to divert it. There's absolutely no comparison. There's absolutely no comparison, because there is policies of what Israel can do in Gaza, not necessarily give them better lives, give them better lives elsewhere. But that's not the case in Syria. Israel can't solve the problem in Syria. The only thing that Israel can hope for is to deter aggression against it, and that's why Israel needs to develop a very big stick. And in my opinion, this basically solves the argument between whether the defense budget should be bigger or smaller, or whether we should have one submarine less or one submarine too much. Israel needs unmistakable deterrence in this case, and that's the only thing that can keep the wolves at bay. The only thing to stop the thing deteriorating into a very, very violent conflict is American resolve, which I don't see coming. America has just basically emerged from 2 ground wars in Asia, and I don't see that they have much appetite in getting into a 3rd ground war in Asia. But the problem is who's more committed. And at the moment, the people on what Ari has called the side of evil seem to have greater commitment and motivation to pursue their interests.
But I don't know if the commitment is enough, because if we see, going again back to Yotam's point earlier about Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, toppling a leader or toppling a government isn't enough.
I agree. That's the point he makes.
This is why I said, again for the 3rd time, this is not a personality problem.
But what do you want, though? Wait a minute, Ari, I must comment on that. Do you want to change the culture of million Syrians, million Iranians? But that's what you want to do, to change their culture, to convert them?
Hold on. Is that your question? Now I'll answer. You mentioned Gaza. It was the perfect example to show this is a cultural problem, not a personality problem. We left Gaza. We left them 300 greenhouses worth hundreds of millions of dollars of export of flowers and vegetables. What did that culture do? They destroyed the greenhouses. They democratically voted in a radical Islamic genocidal terrorist organization to govern them. And now you say they don't have hope? I don't understand. Under the Israeli occupation,
This is not the question.
So now I want to go back to Syria. I don't want to convert them, but I certainly am not going to give a hand, power, weapons, or belief to a culture of such. If you're going to, listen to me, if you're going to get involved, and we've made this mistake in history before, Chamberlain did it horribly in the Holocaust when he signed an agreement in Munich, and he said, peace in our time. It was peace now back then. He signed a deal with the devil. You cannot make deals with them. There is no peaceful solution
to conquer. So what is the solution then? It's a violent one?
If we care about people's human rights and they're being slaughtered, then it's only a military solution. If you don't want to take that price, then step back and let people be slaughtered.
What does it mean, the military solution, with 2 million people in Gaza Strip? They have nothing to lose.
Syria or Gaza?
They are living in
Syria or
Gaza?
We're
talking about Syria. We're talking about
Syria.
But okay,
2 million people are living under Hamas, their own terrorist organization. They voted for it. Don't blame this on Israel.
But wait a minute.
First of all, the Hamas took it by force.
No, they voted for it.
They didn't.
No, they didn't. Gentlemen, let's stay away
Wait a moment.
Gaza, please.
The main issue is Israel. We are 8 million people, which are surrounded about more than 100 million Arabs. The question is how here for the long time can survive in this region. It will not help. We need a stick and a very strong one, and a very big one. But having said that, in the end of the day, we have to find a solution how to live it together.
I've got an idea.
When you are saying all the time, by force, there's not even one example in history that in the long run it worked.
Excuse me. That's the only examples there are. Those are the only examples.
Or to find solution that both
What do you
sides
suggest?
can
Hold on.
What do you suggest?
Hold on, Dr. Sherman. I'd like to actually ask a question based off of that, because you're saying, okay, there are no examples of a violent action, and you brought up the Nazis. Exactly. However, but what we're seeing right now is this culture of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attitudes need to be kind of pushed down, but they're still there in Germany.
I'm not playing the anti-Semitic card. I'm saying again, If you were around in 1940, would you be okay with Chamberlain signing a deal with Hitler? Yes or no?
There
You need
is
some
no
creative
connection between the United
Of course
States.
there is. Because now you
It's
understand that only
ridiculous.
force works with
It's
evil.
ridiculous because
Of course.
over there, the whole world fought against this crazy
They
Hitler in
did
Germany.
not.
And it's
wait a minute.
France
totally
did it,
different.
England
Wait a
did it,
minute.
America did it.
Okay.
The situation is that as a consequence of the Second World War, the Israel state was born. Now the question is how to live together. This
I just want to mention. I just want to
together
mention.
too.
We talked earlier behind the scenes. We talked about there's not a situation of a good guy, bad guy, classic situation. You talk about evil. This is keep it for your bedtime story to your kids. But
You don't
this
believe
is
there's evil and good on
no
the sides?
no. Situation. The reality is more complex than good and evil. Okay,
Assad's not sure if they're evil?
inside the Arab world, there is about 25 armed forces, armed groups that fighting one another. If one of them is going to gain power in Syria or in what was Iraq, we will not see different situation. We need to think.
Because the culture is
Okay, so
problem. That's what I said.
I will not support conquering Syria. I'm not supporting conquering what
Who's
was
saying
Iraq.
conquering
No, you're
Syria?
talking about
But leading an
using
expensive
force. So when are we going to stop using force? Let's say Israel is supporting
What do you say
the attack,
is
and
Syria
then
offering
what?
the Golan?
And then what? 10
Well,
years,
you're offering
a
the Golan.
10-year war,
I'll
a
answer.
10-year
I'll
war,
answer.
15 years.
I'll answer you very briefly.
Very
Again,
briefly, and then we have to end it.
the problem exactly stands exactly what you said. You cannot see clearly the forces of evil and good here, and that is where the problem is. I don't want war for 10 years. I don't want war for 1 year. I will not sit quietly where people are being slaughtered and make believe, well, what's going to happen? You have to fight evil, and if you don't, you become evil itself.
I agree.
All right.
But the question, we have fight for two,
The question is-
three
okay,
generations
just one
already.
comment.
The question is in Gaza Strip. The minister cut and others suggested to build over there.
Oh, sorry to
And
cut you off. Unfortunately, we've
what
run
is-
out of time.
what is
so
silly idea?
that's unfortunately our time for today and this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Again, I'd love to thank our guests. I apologize for cutting us off, but thank you all very much for coming in today again. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Remember to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras, and we'll see you next week.